I want to talk about one of my new columns. It's entitled, We Could Have Had Less Lockdowns, but We Couldn't Have Had More. And it's about one of the fundamental asymmetries in the United States. Let me explain it to you. So, I always read people who want to wind back the clock of the COVID-19 response and talk about the things we could have done instead. And there's broadly two camps. There's a group of people who think that what we did was misguided, was perhaps excessive, and we could have done different things. We could have provided resources, for instance, rather than just had one-size-fits-all draconian restrictions. We could have kept schools open. We could have perhaps even kept colleges open to some degree. We could have had better protections around nursing homes. That's one camp, one set of ideas, rather than a sweeping lockdown that kept everyone in their house for 15 days and then different people fatigued at different rates and different states reopened differently. The other camp thinks that what we needed to do was lock down deeper, harder, longer, or they even entertain the idea that we could have what they call circuit breakers, short lockdowns triggered by hospitalization rates. Those are the two camps as we rewind the tape. And in this essay, I try to analyze those two camps, and my conclusion is, in one direction, it was possible we could have gone in. We could have done those things, provided resources rather than restrictions. I think that was feasible. The other direction, I think, is actually not even feasible. You can't entertain the idea of what would have happened had you gone in that direction because you could not have gone in that direction. Here's why. America is a unique place. It's a land where people believe strongly in individual freedoms and autonomy. It's also politically divided, and it's two different worlds. There's the coastal elites, and then there's a lot of middle of America. And I know because I grew up in LaPorte, Indiana. That's where I went to high school. And so I have a sense of what that part of the country is like. And my sense is that that part of the country would not have tolerated a deeper, harder, longer lockdown. They took as much lockdown as they possibly could, and they wouldn't have taken any more. And many people lament that some governors actually eased up on restrictions early. They're only doing so because they're trying to do what they think their constituency wants. I think it would have been untenable for them to impose longer, harder lockdowns. They may have met with revolt and protest from the citizenry of those states. And so as we wind back the clock and we think about what might have happened, I think one direction is really off the table. You did as much as you could have done in the lockdown setting. In fact, you blew all your reserves. In other words, you made everyone lock down for the 15 days at the same time, even though in many places there wasn't much COVID-19 spreading. And by the time COVID-19 was spreading in some of those places, like South Dakota, there was no will in the population to do it again. You had burnt all your political will. You could have saved that political will and had lockdowns perhaps at the get-go in places that were having some cases rise. But of course, hindsight is 2020. Meanwhile, the restriction direction was always very feasible. You could have offered hotel rooms for people who had no place to stay if they had COVID-19 to separate from their families. You could have offered resources for the most vulnerable people in society. You could have targeted prisons better, nursing homes better. Those were the places where the pandemic spread far in excess of any other place. You could have done those things. You could have done what public health has always done, which is empower people rather than be an arm of the police state. Let's talk about that. Right now, I'm reading in New Zealand that citizens are not even allowed re-entry into the country because they're worried about Omicron. In a country where eligible people have 93% vaccination rates and 78% of the population has had one dose of vaccine, that's a bold move for a liberal democracy to prevent the right of re-entry of your own citizens. That is a bold move of a liberal democracy. When this pandemic is over, we need an accounting of what are the limits of liberal democracy and who decides. Who decides what's an emergency, who decides when to use emergency powers, and who decides what the state can do, how powerful the brute force of the state can be. And I think that's a conversation that is not just a medical conversation. It's a political science conversation. It's a conversation that needs the body politic involved as well. And so I'm very worried that people think we could have gone more in that direction. I think that ran counter to the individualism that exists in so much of this country. And that individualism is not something to lament. It's something that makes this country great, actually. A country where people have always felt that by your own merit, you can pull yourself up. Now, that doesn't mean that the state can't help you. I mean, I think good policy is when the state empowers people to have true equality of opportunity. But I think the spirit that we have in America, that we can do better and that we to some degree, control our own future is a powerful spirit. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. So I think on that axis of replaying the clock, on this idea of circuit breakers, it's not possible. It's not tenable. There's not going to be a circuit breaker. I don't know why you think that there would be. There's very little political appetite for that, even in the most liberal urban strongholds, let alone the rest of America. They don't want a circuit breaker. And many of these people appear not to have traveled that much. If you travel across this country, you will find that a lot of this country is behaving like normal, and other pockets of this country are extremely concerned about Omicron, even though they're triple vaccinated. And that's a stark difference in our attitudes on risk and attitudes around life. And so anyway, I come back to this thing. We could have had fewer lockdowns. We couldn't have had more lockdowns. I stand by that. I think that's the right way to think about it. You cannot ask this country to be something it's not. You go to war with the country you have. You enter a pandemic with the country you have. And this is this country. And it's got a lot of charm to it. That's why a lot of us are sticking around. So if you like this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message. And it's been a while, but until next time.